Dear Prudence from the Beatles, written by John Lennon, appearing on the White Album. Beautiful song featuring John Lennon on both an acoustic guitar and then overdubbing again on an electric guitar, playing a finger picking pattern guitarists know as Travis picking. So we have this cool little introduction that only happens once in the song, and these are the chords. We have a D add 9. If you don't know the voicing, it goes like this from low to high: D, F sharp, A, E. Right? It's a D chord with the 9th added on top. To a D, C over D, G over D, A over D, C over D, again, and then we get into the main structure of the tune. But let's take a look at those chords for a second. And in general, throughout this whole tune, okay, the story goes that when the Beatles traveled to India to learn about meditation and whatnot, that's when Lennon wrote the tune. And you could hear the sort of Indian influence on the music because it has a droning low D note throughout, okay? And that gives it that sort of sound. But it's a cool study in how, well, you can use slash chords in a song. And slash chords are when you have a chord on top, usually a triad, it doesn't have to be though, and then a different note on the bottom. So like I said, D add 9, it's pretty familiar sound to a D, right? But then you would think you might do something like this, continue to go down, C, G, and all that, but the sound doesn't turn out like that because the bottom note is always there, right? So it's down here because the 6th string of the guitar is detuned down to D. So and what that does is it sets up like all this sort of anticipation for what's coming next. And then we get the main riff. Okay, and let's take a look at what that is. The overall harmonic structure is based on a D of some kind because you have this F sharp note on the top, it's the 3rd of D, right? And then you have a D over here, a D here, and a D here. But the thing of it is, you're getting these moving notes sounds pretty ominous just by itself like that. But within the context of the D harmony, it's got this sort of melancholy sort of wistfulness to it, you know? And it's funny because I remember, when I first started to learn the song and this chord progression in particular, I've heard it before, and I'm thinking to myself, I've heard this chord progression before, and I couldn't think of what the tune was. And then I thought about it, and I said, of course I've heard it before. I've heard it from the Beatles before. Let me explain. So, right, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which preceded Dear Prudence by about a year or so, right? Also written by John Lennon. The Beatles were no strangers to, borrowing ideas from other places, including themselves. So the chord progression was so good, John Lennon decided to use it again in a different key. So this, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, is in the key of A. But if we look at it, it's the same thing. We have basically an A chord on the top, right? And then you have this descending line. A, G on the bottom, F sharp, F, and then even going to the fifth, E against the A chord. Well, it's the same thing in Dear Prudence. It's an A, the fifth, against the D, C, B, B flat. And, those A notes are no mistake or anything, because Paul McCartney emphasizes the A notes on the downbeat on the bass. So, it's an important part of the sound of the chord progression, right? Okay, so let's take a look now how you can think about these chords, right? If I had a D chord, right, and then I move down to a C on the bottom. Now, I've seen some sources call that D7 over C. Yeah, because the C is technically the seventh, right? It would be, but I don't get that kind of vibe from there. This sort of thing, when you have a static chord and the bottom notes start just sort of walking down, again, it's that wistful kind of mood to it. But there's different ways that can be done, like this. Now, okay, that kind of chord progression. Let me show you what I did there. That's a D, D over C, G over B, G minor over B flat. That's one of those like Tin Pan Alley, Great American Songbook type of chord progressions. Anyone who's ever seen a musical from that time period, that the musicals that were written in the 1940s or even 50s, you might recognize that type of sound. So, and I've discussed this before in some of my other videos on the Beatles. Lennon and McCartney were well versed in the pop music of the day. It wasn't just the early rock and roll like Chuck Berry and whatnot that they were influenced by. Yeah, sure, it was that too. But also, they kind of knew, the music of George Gershwin, and Irving Berlin and these kinds of songwriters. That was the pop music of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, kind of thing. So they would have been familiar with those tunes. Now, I'm not suggesting that Dear Prudence came from George Gershwin. No. But what I'm trying to do is thread the needle a little bit in a sort of nerdy musical way to show how things evolve and progress, So if this type of thing might have been the seed for it, then eventually we might have gotten and so on. All right, that's a little bit about the harmony in Dear Prudence. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of it. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel for more videos like this to come. Thanks for watching.